In 2015, Stonewall were awarded a grant of $100,000 by the philanthropic organisation Arcus Foundation to become trans-inclusive. The head of the Arcus Foundation, John Stryker, is heir to a multi-billion-dollar medical corporation. In an interview published by think tank Synagos in 2008, Stryker explained a precondition of being awarded a grant. We also required that all grantees have a board-approved non-discrimination policy that includes sexual orientation and gender identity. We believe it is critical for all our grantees to show an organisational dedication to LGBT rights, officially and in writing. This is not UK law, but the policy mandated by Arcus Foundation is the same policy pushed by Stonewall to all organisations signed up to its Diversity Champion Scheme or Workplace Equality Index. An organisation's position in Stonewall's Diversity Champion Scheme is entirely dependent on how well it implements Stonewall guidance. And the Welsh Government have implemented Stonewall guidance very well.
Kathleen Stock is a professor of philosophy at the University of Sussex.
Some of the documents we've seen in terms of the different parts of the civil service across the UK show Stonewall asking the civil service to change their language to include gender identity when they talk about the Equality Act. And extraordinarily, in some cases, including the Welsh case, the civil servants have changed the language in their description of the Equality Act to include gender identity, which is not legislated for.
Can you remember any examples?
So it happened in Wales. So they were describing in a document for civil servants what the legislative provisions were, and it included sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And gender identity is not in the Equality Act, but that's what Stonewall have lobbied for.
Absolutely.
So the civil service have gone beyond what the legislators have asked them to do in terms of the law, and they have changed the language because a lobby group has asked them to.
This is not just a one-off, right? So a couple of years ago, I was involved in a grassroots campaign because people started to notice that local authorities were describing the protected characteristic as gender identity rather than reassignment. And quite often they were leaving out sex as well. So they were saying gender and gender identity. So this grassroots campaign got people to write to the local authorities and point out the law. And in many cases, it got changed. A recent case I saw was Ofcom have got their list of protected characteristics as including gender identity. So this is a real problem, and in my own organisation, I've tried to raise the fact that policies seem to go way beyond actual law in a way that hasn't been tested and hasn't been subject to the usual kind of legal tests, and I've got nowhere because the whole background sentiment is, this is our values, this can only be good. We're doing this, we're good people, we're doing good things here, and they're just not thinking it through for its practical consequences.
One of the consequences of adding gender identity as a protected characteristic in law is that young people may come to believe that they have a gender identity as well as a biological sex. The Stryker Corporation make money from gender reassignment surgery. Queer theorists believe that by breaking down the binary opposition between male and female, they can undermine heteronormativity and, in so doing, undermine the social prejudice against children who are gender non-conforming.
Think about how difficult it is for sissy boys, or how difficult it is for tomboys to function socially without being bullied, or without being teased, or without sometimes suffering threats of violence. Or without their parents intervening to say, maybe you need a psychiatrist, or why can't you be normal? So, there are institutional powers like psychiatric normalization, and there are informal kinds of practices like bullying, which try to keep us in our gendered place. There's a real question for me about how such gender norms get established and policed, and what the best way is to disrupt them and to overcome the police function. It's my view that gender is culturally formed, but it's also a domain of agency or freedom. It's most important to resist the violence that is imposed by ideal gender norms, especially against those who are gender different, who are non-conforming in their gender presentation.
Butler proposes undermining heteronormativity by changing language. Jeremy Miles appears to be completely on board with this.
I went through my entire school journey without having my identity or my feelings as a gay kid reflected. And that takes its toll, although it also takes a while to figure that out. And we all know from our history what happens when people are hidden. It leads to ignorance, to discrimination, and to pain. And we've come a long, long way. But now we have an opportunity to make sure that our future generations live in a Wales of compassion, of care, and of respect, where everybody can be themselves.
On the Cardiff University website, it states, "It has traditionally been said that while sex is biological, one is male or female, gender is social and cultural. But recent theorists, following Judith Butler, and including some of our members, see biological sex and gender as inextricably mixed, and both, in some senses at least, culturally constructed and performative." In her paper, "They won't let us play unless you're going out with one of them. Girls, Boys and Butler's Heterosexual Matrix in the Primary Years," Professor Emma Renold writes, "The heteronormativity of gender relations in the early years is certainly ripe for some gender trouble, and some of this work is well underway and radically disrupting a range of gender and sexual truths in what might be more fittingly described as the heteroformative years." Professor Reynolds' influence is evident in the RSE guidance, where the definition of the word gender has changed.
It's very bad for gay rights, but it's also bad for kids who are gender non-conforming because we rationalise through language. So what the guidance tells us is that gender now is an identity.
Okay.
So children will not be taught that gender is a synonym for sex. They will be taught that gender is an identity. So a word that was an objective truth has been redefined as a subjective feeling. Now, we all rationalise using language, and children rationalise their feelings using language. So there's no doubt that, in my mind, and in the minds of plenty of others, that those gender non-conforming boys and girls who don't fit into the stereotypical boy or girl, if they feel a bit left out, a bit different, they will rationalise those feelings by subscribing to the belief that they have a gender that doesn't match their sex.
Professor Reynolds' influence is also evident in supporting educational materials.
It's really important to me that we ensure that children and young people in Wales grow up to be healthy, confident and compassionate individuals. And today we see the launch of Cardiff University's primary agenda. These are free teaching resources for those that are working in our primary schools with children aged 7 to 11 to help deliver really important, exciting and engaging relationships education. I hope that our teachers will really engage with these resources, and I want to say a huge thank you to everybody that has been involved. By working together on these important lessons, we can realise the dream of children growing up to be healthy, confident, compassionate individuals. So please follow along, and a huge thank you to everyone that's been involved.
Within Primary Agenda, it states that children have a right to a gender identity. It also states that gender and gender identity are protected characteristics under the Equality Act of 2010. Guidance published by the UK government on the 18th of December 2023 confirms that gender and gender identity are not protected characteristics. Nevertheless, Andrew Moffat, the Chief Executive Officer of No Outsiders charity, believes it is important that children are taught that these things are important.
Children need to be talking about their gender and their gender identity, not one way to be a boy, not one way to be a girl. You can tell me who you are and I will not pass judgment.
Iggy Moon, chair of the Memorandum of Understanding on Conversion Therapy, explains how the concept of gender as the domain of agency and freedom is liberating.
It isn't about gender ideology. It's about us all being able to understand the expansive way that we need to think about gender. It doesn't belong to anybody in particular. It doesn't need to be in a binary, which is inherent from history and colonialism. It's a more expansive, free-thinking idea that we need to put into our understanding of psychology, into our understanding of therapy, in order that we can explore with clients, with young people, their freedom to be able to be who they wish to be.
Psychotherapist James Caspian was originally involved in the production of the Memorandum of Understanding on Conversion Therapy, version 2.
And my recommendations were that the memorandum should be made safe by acknowledging that people sometimes regretted gender transition and detransitioned, and that it was all right to work with them, and that it was all right to explore with people, especially given that we were seeing so many younger women, especially with complex mental health issues, coming and asking for treatment. And so I was simply recommending to make it safe. And this was completely sidelined. And I heard from 3 or 4 different people that there was a lot of bullying that went on and that people were afraid to speak up. But it was pretty clear to me that there was an agenda behind the memorandum. And what that agenda was actually was coming from people who were coming from a very different place from those of us who might have worked clinically and medically. It was coming from people who had more of a political and ideological interest in gender identity and not necessarily in medical transition at all. In fact, most of the people I've observed who seem to be most active in that element of the memorandum are not in any way connected to medical transition. So that wasn't on their minds. I think what was on their minds was that they believed that there were these huge cohorts of young people who really were trans, whatever that is, because that's not something that's ever really established what it is. I mean, I can tell you from working in a clinic that people come and ask for treatment for lots of different reasons. There isn't one kind of intrinsic trans person, there are people, there are just individuals with different feelings about themselves, trying to make sense of themselves. And so I think the people who were angling for this memorandum had an ideological and political motivation to try to, they're kind of iconoclasts. They want to have a kind of gender revolution where you completely break down any kind of binary gender roles. I mean, they talk about gender identity, but I see it more in terms of roles, the gender roles that people have, how men are meant to be and how women are meant to be, and the kind of collective assumptions and history of all that. It's quite complex and deep. So I think they wanted to make it that, you couldn't argue with someone who said, well, I'm this other gender identity, or I'm that, or I'm non-binary, or I'm one of the many, there's 72 different genders on one thing I looked at. So I think that's what they were thinking. Yeah, I think that's what they were thinking. They wanted to educate these, ignorant therapists that there are all these other ways of being out there and all these different gender identities, and you're going to have to, agree with that. But what they haven't realised that actually this is going to affect people medically, and that thousands and thousands of people are transitioning and then saying they regretted and detransitioning. And there is the evidence out there that is the case.
These ideas are being pushed into Welsh schools.
And I'm very proud of our record as a Welsh Labour government for the last 5 years, whether it's the LGBT-inclusive relationship sexuality education in the new curriculum, which I think is genuinely groundbreaking in terms of LGBT equalities in Wales, whether it's...
Hi everyone, my name is Professor E.J. Renold, and I am here to share with you a very brief introduction to Wales's new statutory relationships and sexuality education. We have been privileged to design and deliver professional learning to schools in South Central Consortia for over 4 years now, with Dr. Esther McGeaney and more recently Dr. Leanne Cole.
Professor Renold is a member of the Welsh Government's independent LGBTQ+ expert panel. Meanwhile, the Detrans subreddit currently has almost 52,000 members. Abigail Shrier, author of Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, explains.
Why would a teacher tell her class of kindergartners that only they know their true gender? What could possibly be the justification for telling small boys that they might really be girls and telling small girls that they might really be boys? The biggest hint I got to the answer came from talking to detransitioners. Remember, these are young women who underwent transition and then later regretted it. Again and again, they told me that while they were transitioning, they were angry, they were sullen, and they were politically radical. They very often cut off their families. They were coached in this by transgender influencers online, and they rushed toward their new glitter families. You'll often see gender-confused people among the ranks of Antifa or at Black Lives Matter rallies. Having turned against their families of origin, they are easy prey for those who recruit revolutionaries. Put another way, the chaos is the point. Just as the point of critical race theory is to turn the American people against one another, so the point of gender ideology is to stop the formation of stable families, the building blocks of American life.
In November 2022, a gender was removed from Hub, the Welsh Government education site, and Professor Renold and Esther McGeaney deleted their Twitter accounts. There was no explanation as to why. In October 2019, Jeremy Miles was part of the audience at the launch of Brook Cymru, a Welsh offshoot of Brook. Dougie Boyd from Brook explained the importance of removing the parental right to withdraw a child from RSE teaching.
Schools and people who set curriculums are very experienced people, and they have the knowledge and the understanding and the skills to teach young people in a way that is appropriate to them and that will be accessible and inclusive to all. In no other part of the curriculum do we allow parents to withdraw young people from education that is evidence-based, education that is facts-based, and education that we have proven that they have a right to access through things like the Covenant on Children's Rights from the UN.
On the Brook Learn website, there are free resources to be used by schools and colleges, including a terminology guide. In the guide, it states, Brook is really proud to support this truly flexible and comprehensive terminology guide, and we would love to see it in every school, college, university and workplace. Through our work, we're committed to providing young people with opportunities to effect change, and we're thrilled that our young volunteers were involved in the production of this fantastic resource. In a world where language is constantly evolving, this toolkit will support and encourage people to have open conversations about sexuality and gender, which is the first step in reducing harmful taboos, challenging stigma, and creating a more inclusive society. The guide defines the phrase gender binary as a mainly Western cultural idea that there are only two genders, and everyone must be either one or the other. As gender is a synonym for sex, there are only two genders. In June 2021, Brook announced that they were intervening in support of the Tavistock in an appeal to the judgment in the legal case brought by detransitioner Kira Bell. Kelly Harris, the business development lead for Brook Cymru, has been a member of the Welsh Government Education Committee. She's been highly influenced by Professor Emma Renold, is highly supportive of Jeremy Miles' stance on the use of pronouns, and she has taken great delight in the failure of the judicial review brought against the Welsh Government by concerned parents, and is firmly of the belief that parents should not be informed of a child's social transition in school without the child's consent. Brook Cymru have won the contract to provide teacher training to schools in the Central South Consortium.
But many people in our community are still fighting battles. Because if you need to know why we come together as a community to stand up for ourselves and for others, just look around you. Many of the rights that I was still marching for in my youth, we've won those. And it fills me with pride and joy and hope to be able to say that. But our trans friends are still denied basic rights. They've got battles still to win, and we are there with them. Because winning legal rights is the start and not the end of the journey to a civilised society. I always say that equality is indivisible. You can't believe in equality for some without believing in equality for all. And for every community fighting for its rights or its recognition, the struggle may not be the same struggle. The pain is not the same pain. But the destination is the same destination. A Wales, a world of love and hope where we are all equal in our laws and in our hearts, regardless of who we love, how we identify, or the colour of our skin.
Jeremy Miles is so excited about the new RSE curriculum created by Professor Emma Renold that he invited lesbian tennis star Billie Jean King to Wales to find out more. The same invitation was not extended to lesbian tennis star Martina Navratilova.
Need to use force if necessary in a march. At the moment, no, I just want to make sure. Yeah, you know now. Let me just explain to you, and it'll give you some understanding. Yeah. So at the moment, your march, this group of people, is causing confrontation between different groups of people. We're lesbians. It's gay pride. Whatever you are at the moment is causing confrontation. I did not want to. I went home and I fucking you're bullshit. Fuck off.
In May 2021, I wrote to Jeremy Miles, "Dear Mr. Miles, congratulations on being appointed Minister for Education and the Welsh language. I am concerned by the rapidly growing influence of a gender ideology that asserts that gender identity is something that is innate and untethered from biological sex. This ideology, promoted by several organisations, of whom Stonewall is the most influential, seems to have had a significant influence on government policy, including educational policy. We see this in the references to transgender children in the document below. You may be aware of the Department of Education guidance published last year. The guidance stated, "We're aware that topics involving gender and biological sex can be complex and sensitive matters to navigate. You should not reinforce harmful stereotypes, for instance, by suggesting that children might be a different gender based on their personality and interests, or the clothes they prefer to wear. Resources used in teaching about this topic must always be age-appropriate and evidence-based. Materials which suggest that nonconformity to gender stereotypes should be seen as synonymous with having a different gender identity should not be used, and you should not work with external agencies or organisations that produce such material. While teachers should not suggest to a child that the non-compliance with gender stereotypes means that either their personality or their body is wrong and in need of changing, Teachers should always seek to treat individual students with sympathy and support. Can I ask you to do two things? Number one, follow the lead of Department of Education and issue similar guidance for schools in Wales. Two, refrain from referring to transgender children in government documents and elsewhere. I do feel that we're living in a climate of fear when any questioning of the gender identity ideology is met with an accusation of transphobia. It should not be transphobic to ask questions. It is important that we do ask questions, particularly when it impacts the psychological well-being of our children. Yours sincerely. My advice wasn't taken. Guidance similar to that issued by the Department of Education has not been issued to schools in Wales, and the Education Minister is not inhibited in referring to transgender children, as is evidenced by his comments at an Education Committee meeting in May 2022.
In terms of the work we are doing on the trans guidance specifically, over the course of the rest of this year, we're taking forward the development of a whole school approach to RSE, and clearly LGBTQ plus inclusion will feature significantly in that, and it includes specific guidance to schools to support trans children and young people. It's clear, just the way that Shrier Williams, your question was suggesting, schools are keen to have clear and robust guidance and training as well, actually, to support trans children and young people. It's obviously a very complex piece of work, and it raises a number of issues that need to be addressed sensitively as part of that whole school approach in order for it to be effective. But it is definitely, obviously, a gap that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. And, I would be disappointed, I think, if we hadn't, if it wasn't substantially complete by the end of this year.
In contrast, in draft guidance issued by the Department of Education in December 2023, titled Gender Questioning Children, it states, in recent years, we have seen a significant increase in the number of children questioning the way they feel about being a boy or a girl, including their physical attributes of sex and the related ways in which they fit into society. This has been linked to gender identity ideology, the belief that a person can have a gender, whether male or man, female or woman, or other, that is different to their biological sex. This is a contested belief. Many people believe this concept is one that reinforces stereotypes and social norms relating to sex. The guidance further states, gender identity is a contested belief. It is a sense a person may have of their own gender, whether male, female, or another category such as non-binary. This may or may not be the same as their biological sex. Many people do not consider that they or others have a gender identity at all. The draft guidance for schools in England has been welcomed by senior clinicians.
I think it's a very, very substantial move, and one that I personally and a lot of people, clinicians involved in this work, welcome. The most important location where children expressing themselves, their difficulties as having problems and painful emotional relationship with their gender identity, expresses it itself in school. We've made great progress in the NHS as a result of the CAS review, which is one of the main...
Was the official NHS review.
That was official NHS review, and one of its main findings was that affirmation is the wrong treatment for these children. We need to understand...
Meaning saying, yes, you're trans.
Yes, exactly.
And,
saying, if someone says, if a girl says, I'm a boy, to affirm that is the wrong treatment and shallow and superficial, because we need to understand what the child means, how they came to it, what their personal narrative is, and we all know a lot of them have many serious mental health problems that need addressing. So calling the child trans is the wrong thing. Affirmation is wrong. We're getting that right in the clinic. Now we need to get it right in the school. There's been a sort of not joined up thinking with schools having to affirm children, whilst in the clinic we're saying it's wrong.
But you're saying
it's very progressive.
You say calling the child trans is wrong, but
Yes.
Children who say they are trans would say you're denying their kind of reality, their right to call themselves that.
Well, I think we have to recognise that we're talking about children often from the age of 7, 6, even younger, puberty, immediately post-puberty, these children are in the midst of the turmoil of adolescent development, where they will express themselves in many different ways. And one of the things that we do know is that social contagion is a very, very important factor.
So would you agree with the former Prime Minister Liz Truss then, who says that socially transitioning before the age of 18 should be banned and that should be set out in law?
I don't think I'm in a position to make an argument that's so steeped in legal questions. What I think really matters is the centre of gravity to be shifted so that teachers who have been very, very confused and haven't known what to do have been subjected to trans organisations coming into the school with an ideological, political perspective, telling the teachers that they have to affirm, have to even to celebrate trans children when they can see it's a troubled child. They've also told them that they shouldn't speak to the parents, which is completely inappropriate in this group. So what I'm saying is that these children come to this position for multiple reasons, and we need to understand the child. To call the child trans is to foreclose it.
Guidance will be provided to schools in Wales in 2024. Brook Cymru will be one of a number of organisations advising the Welsh Government.